I want to highlight an article that came out a few months ago on a site called Jstor, which has the tagline, "Where news meets its scholarly match," and which this article does its best to counter. This article is titled J.R. Tolkien's Jewish Dwarves by an author named Matthew Wills. And it tells us that dwarves weren't just a product of Tolkien's creative mind, they were shaped by the anti-Jewish culture that surrounded him. And as you read this article, you'll see that the entire thing is precipitated around the author's own prejudices. Prejudices that can be defined by the stereotypes that warped minds created in the 20th century. And so to justify that, they stick in two quotes. One from a letter that Tolkien wrote in 1955. And their quote is this, that dwarves were like Jews at once native and alien in their habitations. But here's the whole quote. "I do think of the dwarves like Jews, at once native and alien in their habitations, speaking the languages of the country, but with an accent due to their own private tongue." Notice he's talking about languages there. And you know what Tolkien was? He was a philologist, which means a student of languages, how they were created, how they've changed, how they're used. And then they go on to buttress their argument that Tolkien was somehow an anti-Semitic writer of The Hobbit. They go on to say that in a 1971 interview, he also said that the dwarves, of course, are quite obviously, I mean, couldn't you say that in many ways they remind you of the Jews? But they leave out the most important part again, which comes right after this, which was pretty easy to find, which is this. He said, their words are Semitic. The dwarves' words are Semitic. Obviously constructed to be Semitic. So what's the most important representation of the dwarves in here? It's their Semitic structure of the language. It has nothing to do with the stereotypes that surrounded them. And this is where the scholarly article falls apart. It shifts completely away from any sort of reflection of what Tolkien actually wrote, said, or studied into a complete anecdotal piece of trash. It never speaks about Tolkien's philological roots of the Dwarvish language, Kuzdul, right? The Semitic roots. It paints Tolkien with a racist brush that in this writer's own mind, he sees now, because it's easy, right? It's easy to say, well, the dwarves, okay, they look like Jews in these ways. Maybe they're rich and they're greedy. They're big noses, I guess. Like, is that it? Is that what we're talking about here? No, he tells us that the bearded dwarves of The Hobbit mirror the Jew as commonly portrayed in medieval art, and that the stereotype of the Jews, oh, let me get that whole quote for you. The stereotype of the Jews as whiny, cowardly, and greedy, standard in the culture of Tolkien's youth, was manifest in The Hobbit's dwarves. Here's the thing. The author is just taking his own cloak of racist and stereotypical attitudes, and he's draping it right over Tolkien's grave. He just takes it off him and says, oh, Tolkien, here you are. Let me put that right on top of you, because clearly that's what I see in you. I am going to, in technical terms, I'm going to eisegete and not exegete. I'm going to put myself into you and not look at you and say, see what you did, and take it out as a scholar and look at what you actually did. And so if this is supposed to be the scholarly match of news, as it says here in this tagline, he ignores all of that. While the language was constructed to be Semitic, the dwarves and their appearance is derived actually from something mostly called the Prose Edda, an Old Norse textbook written in the 13th century. And if you just go there, super easy to find online, you can see that the names of the dwarves, like Bifur and Bofur, Nori, Fili, Kili, Dane, Thrain, I think those were all in there. Right? And the inspiration for those words was from that. And then we go to other Old Norse mythologies. You can see that the dwarves there, or I can't remember the exact name, but the way that they described them there, they would live underground. And they were metalsmiths and inventors, and they were industrious and crafty, and they would build things. Does that sound familiar to Tolkien's dwarves? Because clearly what they're referring to are the Jews in the Old Norse myths. No, there were no Jews in the Old Norse myths. So, I mean, Tolkien's inspiration here is not cultural anti-Semitism. It's his deep knowledge of Norse legend and married with the philological pursuits of his daily life, of what he did in school every day as a professor, that informed his creation of the dwarves. And this scholarly article ignores all of that. It has no reference to anything about that. No philological references to Semitic structure of languages, no references to the Norse prose Edda, and the distinct and easy to find references that Tolkien made himself in later letters to it. So here's the thing. I'm not saying there is nothing Jewish inspired in the Dwarves. Tolkien certainly said that and admitted to it when it came to the structure of their language, and in that they were sort of strangers in a strange land. They would keep their own language, but still live along with the other people, right? But it's easy for a hack scholar like this to ignore any actual research and just, I guess, just try to meddle in the victimhood Olympics here. Because, why work hard at something? Why actually do any research when you'd rather be or from all of your intellectual friends because you continue to run in the victimhood race? And it's people like this that give Tolkien a bad name. They're trying to give him a bad name, right? They want to show him as a bad guy, and so we have to change him. And that's what we get with the Rings of Power and other new incarnations and other fan properties like The Witcher or Star Wars or Conan the Barbarian or any Marvel bit, right? They have to create a name for themselves. So why not go ahead and try and meddle in the victimhood Olympics? It's the worst kind of coattailing on Tolkien that's imaginable. I know, no, Tolkien was not anti-Semitic. Dwarves are not stand-ins for Jews. But like I said, that narrative, they can't go with that because it won't promote their own victimhood narrative. And they won't get any college kudos for that. So like many Tolkien scholars these days, like those probably advising on the Rings of Power, there is pretty much nothing scholarly about this. Thanks for watching. Make sure you don't miss any future Torque Dailies by clicking the subscribe button and that little bell there. And you can also become a patron by going to theonering.com/patron, where you can join us in our Discord chats and our private live chats.